Imagine losing everything in 6 weeks. Your billion-dollar fortune gone. Your family disowned you. Your husband filed for divorce. Your reputation destroyed worldwide. All because of 30 seconds of hatred caught on video. But what if I told you that destruction led to redemption? That one woman's fall changed an entire industry? That sometimes the villain becomes the catalyst for justice? There are moments in life that seem ordinary at the time, moments that feel like just another evening, just another event. But looking back, you realize that was the moment. The moment everything changed. The moment someone's entire world came crashing down. This is one of those stories. Let me take you to Houston, Texas. A glittering charity gala at one of the city's most exclusive venues. Crystal chandeliers throwing light across marble floors. Men in tuxedos. Women in designer gowns worth more than most people's cars. The kind of event where a single table costs $50,000 and the champagne flows like water. This wasn't just any charity event. This was where power met privilege, where tech executives rubbed shoulders with Pentagon officials, where billion-dollar deals were whispered over cocktails, and a single handshake could change the course of entire companies. And right in the center of it all was Rebecca Langford. Rebecca was born into wealth, the kind of wealth most of us can't even imagine. Her family owned Langford Dynamics, a defense contracting company that had been building military equipment for 3 generations. Billions of dollars, government contracts, the kind of legacy that made you untouchable. Or so she thought. Rebecca walked into that gala like she owned the place. And in her mind she did. Designer dress, diamonds at her throat, that particular smile, wealthy people where when they know they're better than everyone else in the room. Her husband David walked beside her. But this was Rebecca's world. She was the heir, the princess of a billion-dollar empire. From the moment she arrived, the cracks in her character started to show. There was the champagne incident. A Latino server brought her a glass, and Rebecca sent it back loud enough for nearby tables to hear. "Did you even wash your hands?" she said, looking at him like he was dirt on her shoe. The server's face burned with humiliation, but he apologized and brought another glass. That's what you do when you need the job, right? You swallow the insult and smile. Then came the valet, a young black man who brought their car around. Rebecca looked him up and down and asked, "Did you even finish high school? I hope you don't damage anything expensive." The young man's jaw tightened, but he said nothing. What could he say? At the networking reception, an Asian woman in a sharp business suit tried to introduce herself. She was a software engineer, excited about potential partnerships. Rebecca cut her off mid-sentence. "We're not interested in whatever you're selling," she said and turned away. Just like that. Dismissed. Invisible. But all of that, all of those cruel little moments, they were just the warm-up. Because Rebecca had spotted someone who made her blood boil just by existing in her space. Across the room, moving through the crowd with quiet confidence, was a black man in an impeccable Navy suit. He wasn't just attending, he belonged. Pentagon officials greeted him warmly. Tech executives pulled him aside for conversations. He moved through Rebecca's world like he had every right to be there. And that enraged her. In Rebecca's mind, there was an order to things. A hierarchy. People like her at the top and everyone else somewhere below. This man, whoever he was disrupting that order. He was sitting at tables where she believed he didn't belong, shaking hands with people she considered her peers. She watched him for an hour, her anger building with every smile, every handshake, every moment he seemed comfortable in this world of wealth and power. Finally, she couldn't take it anymore. Rebecca grabbed her wine glass and marched across the ballroom. Her heels clicked against the marble like gunshots. People turned to watch. Something about her energy, everyone could feel it. That moment before something terrible happens, when the air gets heavy and you know you should look away, but you can't. The man, his name was Marcus Ellison, was sitting at a table with Pentagon officials and tech executives. They were laughing at something he'd said, relaxed, enjoying themselves. Rebecca stopped right in front of the table. The conversation died instantly. "Excuse me," she said, her voice dripping with false politeness. "I couldn't help but notice you sitting here with these distinguished guests." Marcus looked up at her, his face calm. "Good evening, ma'am. Is there something I can help you with?" "Oh, I think you can," Rebecca said, her voice getting louder. "I think you can explain what a diversity hire is doing at a table with real decision-makers." The table went silent. Phones started coming out. People at nearby tables turned to watch. Marcus stayed calm. "Ma'am, I assure you I'm here in a professional capacity, evaluating." "Evaluating." Rebecca laughed, harsh and cruel. "Let me guess. Some affirmative action program got you in the door, and now you think you belong with people who actually earned their positions?" David appeared at her elbow. "Rebecca, maybe we should—" She shook him off. Her racism, buried under years of polite society rules, was exploding into the open. The mask was off. "You people," she hissed, leaning toward Marcus, "you people need to learn your place. You don't belong here. You didn't earn this. You're just a diversity checkbox." And then she said it. The word. The slur. The word that carries centuries of hatred and pain. "You're just a monkey playing dress-up." The entire room seemed to freeze. 300 people holding their breath. Marcus Ellison sat perfectly still, wine now dripping down his face, his navy suit stained dark red. His expression didn't change. He didn't flinch. He just looked at Rebecca with eyes that had seen this hatred before, probably his whole life. Around the room, phones were up, recording, capturing everything. The flash of cameras, the shocked faces. Rebecca stood there, chest heaving, still holding the empty wine glass, looking down at this man she'd just humiliated, and in her mind, in that moment, she thought she'd won. She thought she'd put someone in their place. She thought she'd defended the natural order of her world. She had no idea that she'd just destroyed everything, because what Rebecca didn't know, what she couldn't possibly know, was about to burn her entire world to the ground. Within hours, the video went viral. #Winegate was trending worldwide. Rebecca Langford's face was everywhere, frozen in that moment of hatred, wine glass tilted, pure contempt in her eyes. But that was just the beginning. The real story, the truth about the man she'd humiliated, that was still waiting in the shadows. And when it came to light, it would be more devastating than Rebecca could ever imagine. You ever have that feeling when you realize you've made a terrible mistake? That sinking sensation in your stomach when you understand that you can't take it back, can't undo it, can't make it disappear? Now multiply that by 1,000, by 1,000,000. That's where Rebecca's story goes next. The morning after the gala, Rebecca woke up to a nightmare. Her phone was exploding. Hundreds of messages, thousands of notifications. The video, that video of her pouring wine over Marcus Ellison's head, calling him that horrible word, it was everywhere. Twitter, Instagram, TikTok, the news, international news. But Rebecca? She wasn't sorry. Not even a little bit. She sat in her mansion, scrolling through the comments, and instead of feeling shame, she felt justified, righteous. In her mind, she'd stood up for something. She'd defended standards. She'd protected her family's legacy from people who didn't deserve to be in that room. So she doubled down. She posted on social media long paragraphs about merit over political correctness, about how she was the real victim here, about how people were twisting her words, taking things out of context. She did interviews with friendly media outlets, painting herself as a brave defender of American values. "I was standing up for excellence," she told one reporter. For people who actually earned their place instead of checking diversity boxes, every word made it worse. Every interview dug her grave deeper. But Rebecca couldn't see it. She was so convinced she was right that she couldn't see the avalanche coming. Meanwhile, her husband David had a meeting at the Pentagon. It was supposed to be a routine check-in about their biggest contract, yet a $1.2 billion deal for advanced unmanned aerial vehicles. Langford Dynamics had been the frontrunner for months. Their technical specs were flawless. Their pricing was competitive. Everything had been going perfectly. David walked into that Pentagon conference room feeling confident, secure. That feeling lasted about 30 seconds, because sitting at the head of the table, in full military uniform with stars on his shoulders, was Marcus Ellison. Not Marcus Ellison, the diversity hire. Not Marcus Ellison, the quota. General Marcus Ellison, United States Army. A man who had risen from enlisted private to general through 2 decades of service. A man who had faced racism his entire career and overcome it through pure excellence. A man who now controlled $50 billion in annual defense spending. And the man David's wife had called a monkey and drenched in wine in front of 300 witnesses. David's blood turned to ice. The general spoke calmly, professionally. His voice was measured, but there was steel underneath. "Mr. Langford," he said, "let me be clear about something. Your company's technical proposal for the UAV contract is excellent. Truly excellent. Your engineers are talented. Your pricing is fair. On paper, you were our first choice." David felt a sliver of hope. Maybe. However, the general continued, "I don't just evaluate technical capabilities, I evaluate character, values, corporate culture. Because the United States military doesn't just need contractors who can build excellent equipment. We need partners who share our values, who understand honor, dignity, and respect." The general pulled out a tablet and turned it toward David. The video played. Rebecca's voice full of venom. The whine. The slur. The hatred captured in crystal clear detail. "Your wife's behavior," the general said quietly, "reveals everything I need to know about your company's culture. The contract is going to your competitor." David felt his world tilting. $1.2 billion. Gone. Just like that. But the general wasn't finished. Additionally, all existing Langford Dynamics contracts are under review. We'll be examining your company's employment practices, discrimination complaints, and workplace culture. Thoroughly. David drove back to his office in a daze. By the time he arrived, the news had already broken. The stock market had responded instantly. Langford Dynamics stock was in freefall, down 15%, 20%, 32% by market close. His phone wouldn't stop ringing. Major clients, Boeing, Lockheed Martin, Northrop Grumman, all calling to reassess their relationship with Langford Dynamics. Corporate speak for, "We're canceling our contracts and we don't want to be associated with you." Billions of dollars, evaporating like morning dew. The board called an emergency meeting. David sat at that mahogany table, surrounded by the men and women who had helped build this company, and watched them turn on his wife like wolves. But it wasn't just about the gala. The deeper they dug, the worse it got. Rebecca's racism wasn't a one-time thing. It was a pattern. HR files going back 15 years. Employee complaints that had been buried. Settlements paid quietly to make discrimination lawsuits disappear. A toxic workplace culture where Rebecca and her family had created an environment that drove away talented people, especially talented people of color. The company David thought he knew was built on a foundation of rot. And then came the moment that broke David's heart. Rebecca's own father, the founder of Langford Dynamics, the patriarch of the family, stood up at that board meeting and spoke. "My daughter," he said, his voice shaking with anger and shame, "has destroyed 3 generations of work. She has embarrassed this family. She has damaged something that took decades to build." He looked directly at David. Effective immediately, Rebecca Langford is stripped of all positions within this company. Her trust fund is frozen pending further review. She no longer speaks for this family or this organization. A father disowning his daughter. In front of the board. In front of everyone. David went home that night to tell Rebecca, to explain what had happened, who Marcus Ellison really was, what she'd actually done. She didn't believe him at first. It couldn't be true. There had to be a mistake. But the evidence was everywhere. Marcus Ellison's military record, his commendations, his awards, the $50 billion in defense spending he controlled. It was all real, all verified, all devastatingly, completely real. Rebecca had humiliated and degraded one of the most powerful men in the defense industry. And she'd done it on camera in front of the world. The lawsuits started coming. Civil rights organizations, former employees finding their courage, media outlets digging into every corner of Langford Dynamics history. David filed for divorce, not because he stopped loving the woman he'd married, but because he couldn't save both his wife and his company. He had to choose, and he chose the company, chose to save thousands of jobs, chose to rebuild something good from the ashes of something toxic. The court case was swift. Rebecca had no defense. The evidence was overwhelming. Criminal charges were filed, assault, hate crimes, civil rights violations. The judge was not sympathetic. "Ms. Langford," she said from the bench, "you have lived a life of extraordinary privilege. You have never faced consequences for your actions. That ends today. 200 hours of community service at a homeless shelter, serving the very people she'd spent her life looking down on." Rebecca walked out of that courtroom and into a world that no longer recognized her. No fortune, no status, no family, no husband, no friends. Everything, every single thing, was gone. 6 weeks. That's all it took to go from the top of the world to the bottom. But here's the thing about rock bottom. Here's what Rebecca didn't know yet, standing there in the ruins of her life. Sometimes rock bottom is where the real story begins. Sometimes you have to lose everything to find out who you really are. And sometimes the people you've spent your whole life hating are the ones who teach you how to be human. You know what's interesting about losing everything? When you have nothing left to protect, no image, no status, no reputation, that's when you finally have to look in the mirror and see who you really are. For Rebecca Langford, that mirror was a homeless shelter in downtown Houston. The first day was humiliating. Rebecca showed up in clothes that used to cost more than most people's rent, now wrinkled and outdated. She stood in line with the court order in her hand, waiting to report to the shelter coordinator like a criminal checking in with a parole officer, which, in a way, she was. The coordinator was a woman named Maria, a grandmother with kind eyes and no patience for nonsense. She looked at Rebecca's paperwork, looked at Rebecca and said, "You're the wine lady." Not a question. A statement. Rebecca's face burned with shame. "Yes." Maria nodded slowly. "Well, wine lady, here's how this works. You're going to serve meals. You're going to clean bathrooms. You're going to sort donations. You're going to do whatever needs doing, whenever it needs doing. And you're going to treat every single person who walks through that door with dignity and respect. Understood?" "Yes, ma'am," Rebecca whispered. Those first weeks were torture. Not because the work was hard, though it was, but because Rebecca had to face the people she'd spent her entire life believing were beneath her. Veterans who'd served their country and come home to nothing. Single mothers working 2 jobs and still couldn't afford rent. Men and women who'd lost everything to medical bills, to addiction, to bad luck, and a system that didn't care. And Rebecca had to serve them, had to look them in the eye, had to hand them plates of food and say, "Here you go. Is there anything else you need?" At first, she went through the motions robotically. Clock in, do the work, clock out. Don't think, don't feel. Just survive the 200 hours and get it over with. But something started to crack. There was a veteran named James, He'd served 3 tours in Afghanistan, came home with PTSD, and lost his family and his job within a year. He came to the shelter every Tuesday for dinner. And every Tuesday, he said the same thing to Rebecca: "Thank you, ma'am. God bless you." Polite, dignified, even to someone who didn't deserve it. There was a single mother named Aisha with 3 kids. She worked as a nurse's aide during the day and cleaned offices at night. She came to the shelter for food because it meant her kids could eat something nutritious while she stretched every dollar. She never complained, never asked for more than she needed, just thanked everyone with a tired, beautiful smile. There was an elderly man named Mr. Chun who'd lost his restaurant to a fire and his savings to medical bills. He volunteered at the shelter, even though he lived there. Everyone needs purpose, he told Rebecca one day. Everyone needs to feel useful. Week after week, Rebecca heard their stories. Not because she asked, but because when you work side by side with people, when you serve meals and sort clothes and clean together, stories come out naturally. She heard about discrimination, about doors slammed in faces because of skin color, about resumes ignored because of ethnic-sounding names, about the exhaustion of having to prove your humanity every single day. She heard about resilience, about mothers who chose between food and medicine and somehow kept their families together, about veterans who'd survived war zones but couldn't survive coming home, about people who'd lost everything but still showed up to help others. And slowly, painfully slowly, Rebecca started to see them, not as statistics, not as those people, but as human beings, with dreams and dignity and worth that had nothing to do with their bank accounts or their job titles or the color of their skin. One evening, about 3 months into her service, Rebecca was helping serve dinner when she broke down. Just broke, tears streaming down her face as she handed a plate to a young black man who reminded her of the valet she'd humiliated at the gala. "I'm sorry," she whispered. "I'm so sorry." He looked confused. For what? For everything. For being someone who made the world harder for people like you. For being cruel. For thinking I was better when I was nothing. I am nothing. The young man set down his plate. He looked at Rebecca for a long moment. Then he said something that changed everything. "You're not nothing. You're just learning. That's more than most people ever do." Maria found Rebecca in the supply closet later, still crying. The older woman sat down beside her on a box of canned goods. "You're starting to see them," Maria said softly. "Really see them." Rebecca nodded, unable to speak. "Good," Maria said. "That's the first step." While Rebecca was being transformed in that shelter, something else was happening. General Marcus Ellison was changing the entire defense industry. He testified before Congress. He used Rebecca's case as a catalyst for sweeping reform. He stood in front of senators and representatives and said something that made headlines around the world. Technical excellence means nothing if it comes wrapped in hatred. The United States military cannot partner with companies that tolerate discrimination, that bury complaints, that create toxic cultures. Character matters. Values matter. And from now on, we're going to evaluate both. The Pentagon adopted new protocols. Every defense contractor would now face character assessments, workplace culture reviews, mandatory diversity audits. Companies with histories of discrimination would be disqualified, no matter how good their technical proposals. It was revolutionary. The old boy network that had controlled defense contracting for decades suddenly faced unprecedented scrutiny. Companies scrambled to adapt. Executives with discrimination histories were fired. Diversity initiatives transformed from cosmetic gestures to operational requirements. The entire industry was being rebuilt from the ground up, and it all traced back to one viral video of a woman pouring wine on a general's head. David Langford was rebuilding too. He'd chosen to save his company by burning down everything toxic within it. He brought in civil rights consultants He implemented comprehensive bias training, not the superficial kind, but real, deep transformative education. He restructured leadership. Langford Dynamics became majority-minority owned, with diverse leadership that reflected modern America. The company that had lost $2.8 billion in contracts became an industry model for inclusion. It was painful. It was expensive. Many of the old guard left, unwilling to change. But slowly, something better emerged from the ashes. 1 year after the gala, Rebecca stood in that same Houston shelter. But this time, she wasn't there because a judge ordered it. She was there because she wanted to be. Her 200 hours had ended months ago, but Rebecca kept coming back. She organized job fairs, connecting veterans with employers. She helped people navigate the bureaucratic nightmare of social services. She treated everyone with the dignity she'd once denied them. She wasn't rich anymore. She lived in a small apartment, worked a modest job. But she had something she'd never had before: purpose. Real purpose. One Tuesday evening, her mother visited the shelter. The same mother who'd raised her to believe she was better than other people. The same mother who'd taught her that wealth equaled worth. Her mother watched Rebecca serve meals, watched her laugh with Aisha's kids, watched her help Mr. Chin organize donated clothes. And then her mother did something she'd never done before. She cried, "I'm proud of you." Her mother whispered, hugging Rebecca tight, "For the first time in your life, I'm truly proud of who you're becoming." Rebecca held her mother and thought about how strange life was. She'd lost everything: her fortune, her marriage, her family's respect, her place in society. All of it gone. But she'd found something more valuable. She'd found her humanity. General Ellison earned his 4th star that year. In his acceptance speech, he talked about accountability, about transformation, about how the ugliest moments can sometimes spark the most beautiful changes. He never mentioned Rebecca by name. He didn't need to. Everyone knew. The defense industry completed its most significant diversity transformation in history. Companies that had been exclusively white and male for generations now reflected the country they served. It wasn't perfect. Progress never is, but it was real. And somewhere in Houston, a woman who'd once embodied entitled cruelty now spent her evenings serving food to homeless veterans and teaching her mother that worth has nothing to do with wealth. Rebecca Langford's story became a watershed moment. Proof that accountability matters. That transformation is possible. That even unchecked privilege eventually faces consequences in America. But more than that, it proves something else. Sometimes change requires an ugly catalyst. Sometimes the most powerful social movements emerge from the most unexpected confrontations. Sometimes the person who weaponizes hatred accidentally becomes the catalyst for justice. Because Rebecca didn't just fall. She rose. Not back to where she was. She could never go back. But she rose to something better. Something real. And, in the end, isn't that what redemption looks like? Not returning to who you were, but becoming who you should have been all along. A woman who sees people, all people, as human. That's Rebecca's legacy. Not the wine, not the hatred, but the transformation that hatred sparked in herself, in an industry, in a system that desperately needed to change. Sometimes the fall is necessary. Sometimes you have to lose everything to find what really matters. And sometimes the story that starts with a villain ends with hope.